1 Delta to rescue 1 Heavy plane showing. 25 streaming A with all firefighters.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Gioia, and I'm a fire commissioner with the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District in the town of Franklin Square, New York. As I'm sure you'll agree, the firefighting profession is one of the most trusted, respected, and noble professions, and not without good reason. Amongst many other qualities, the firefighting profession is known for its solid reliability and integrity. Trust is of the utmost importance in public safety. The public need to trust firefighters for us to do our job. They need to trust us with their personal property, their homes, their privacy, their safety, and the safety of their loved ones. Our firefighting forefathers established a very long legacy of trust and respect in our profession that we continue to uphold. This solid reputation, which the public can always rely on in any situation, is something which we take great pride in and protect. You can trust firefighters to know their job. You can trust them to have your back. You can trust them to be honest. Trust them to serve your best interests. And when facing great risk to themselves, you can trust them with your safety and even your life. Please take your time to examine and consider the details shared in Calling Out Bravo 7. This film was produced by active duty and retired firefighters.
Given their capacity for exponential growth, high-rise fires present one of the greatest challenges to firefighters today, due to limited access from outside by ladders and the ease with which occupants and rescuers can become trapped. Fires in these structures pose a profound threat to life and property. High-rise buildings are, of course, designed with these considerations in mind. They are therefore built to contain fire, protect exit routes, and employ architectural fire protection measures to prevent structural fire damage. National Fire Service operational procedures provide clear guidance in dealing with these situations and aim to maximise the effectiveness of firefighting and rescue operations whilst minimising risk. In agreement with these specific architectural fire-resistant qualities, firefighting procedures recommend the deployment of personnel into the building. Teams advance up towards the fire, deep into the building if necessary. A control point called a bridgehead is established 2 floors below the fire so that operations can be controlled from an advanced point. This allows the setup of entry control points, so firefighters going to fight fires and carry out rescues can be recorded, and crucially, have their breathing apparatus checked so it's clear how much time they can spend in a dangerous, smoke-filled area. The amount of time each firefighter can spend fighting the fire is limited by the amount of air available, so any minute spent climbing up into a building with equipment is precious firefighting time wasted. Firefighters enter these situations confidently for good reasons. In history, there have been many instances where high-rise fires have been very advanced and aggressive and, in agreement with what the building designers specify, the structures stayed true and intact. According to a 2011 US National Fire Protection Association report, there are on average 110 high-rise fires per year in the US alone. Between 2005 and 2009, there were 550 high-rise fires. Some of the most notable in history include the Joelma building, Sao Paulo, Brazil, 1974. Sparked by an electrical fire, this residential building burned for several hours. The underlying structure was not weakened, in fact it's still in use today. The MGM Grand, which is now Bally's in Las Vegas, caught fire in 1980, killing 85 people. It's had a few facelifts and ownership changes, but the structure underneath was never compromised. It's still in use today. Los Angeles, 1988, what was then called the First Interstate Bank building burned for 3.5 hours. No structural failure at all. In fact, an insurance company moved in and today it's known as the Aon Center. In 2004, the Parque Central, Caracas, Venezuela, the country's tallest building burned for 17 hours. The facade was repaired and it is still in use today. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, One Meridian Plaza, 1991, burned for 18 hours, it was refurbished. Beijing, China, the Mandarin Oriental Hotel burned for 6 hours in 2009, it stood. Chechnya's tallest building burned for 7 hours in April 2013, it stood. Dubai, Moscow, Zurich and many others showed the same results. This is why firefighters continue to commit into these buildings to deal with fires, like those seen in September 2001 in New York and recently at Grenfell Towers in London. The firefighters in New York had absolutely no reason to suspect that those buildings could catastrophically fail due to fires. They knew there was a danger, but absolutely not from complete and sudden building failure. Firefighters are not mindless fools. They too have families to go home to and provide for. They will take calculated risks when people's lives are at risk, and there is a strong likelihood of saving lives, without a doubt. But they will not take suicidal risks. Before looking into one particular high-rise fire, which is not commonly known about and even less well understood, we need to digress slightly and establish an honest foundation and starting point. We live in a phenomenally complex modern world. It's strange, and it's difficult to fully understand with certainty, and at times it's bewildering in its complexity. It's incredible, but when broken down, there are essentially just two main systems: organisational systems based upon man-made rules, and physical systems governed by nature. The man-made systems are not so reliable, but if you were to ask a great physicist, he or she'd explain that when you look at the details of the physical system, the rules of the game are quite simple. The mechanical rules which govern the state of play, every atom, all matter and energy, it all obeys a steady stream of fundamental simple rules. Simple rules of nature which are fixed, immutable and universal. Rules which, if recognised, provide us with the perfect datum for measuring, for testing and for knowing exactly where we stand. The subject that's about to be considered has somehow become obscured by stigma, overcomplicated within a web of complex information, technical arguments and misconceptions, but its complexity contains within it a seed of self-destruction, an irrefutable fact based upon a simple law of nature. When exploring this, we can choose to be blown around like a leaf in the wind of mainstream consensus opinion, or we can confidently walk the path of evidence-based science. For some, sadly, anything beyond mainstream consensus opinion is out of bounds and beyond debate. But, as Michael Crichton so wisely said, historically the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It's a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled. However, science has nothing whatsoever to do with consensus. Consensus is the business of politics. Science, on the contrary, requires only one investigator who happens to be right, which means that he or she has results that are verifiable by reference to the real world. In science, consensus is irrelevant. What is relevant is reproducible results. Science fearlessly and honestly follows the data and the evidence wherever they lead. It seeks no comfortable sanctuary and cuts through all opinion. Consensus prefers popularity, while science sides with the truth and only the truth. Making no assumptions, we must now quickly but unapologetically revise some very basic high school physics. The use of the words freefall to describe parachutists is in fact technically wrong. As you can see, these skydivers are experiencing varying degrees of air resistance, which is slowing them down. In Newtonian physics, freefall is defined as any motion of a body where gravity is the only force acting upon it. Under such conditions, all objects will fall with the same rate of acceleration, regardless of their mass. If we were to lift a bowling ball and some feathers, then drop them together through the air, the feathers would obviously fall slower because of air resistance. If we remove that resistance by creating a vacuum, as demonstrated in this huge NASA vacuum chamber, the world's biggest, both the feather and the ball drop at the same rate of true freefall. Freefall is only possible when there is absolutely no resistance, zero resistance acting against the fall. At 5:21 p.m. on September the 11th, 2001, this steel-framed high-rise collapsed at freefall. It dropped like a rock due to normal office fires, according to the government's final report.
World Trade Center 7 collapsed because of fires fueled by office furnishings. It did not collapse from explosives or from fuel oil fires.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
I turned in time to see what looked like a skyscraper implosion. It looked like it had been done by a demolition crew. The whole thing just collapsing down on itself.
It was almost as if it were a planned implosion. It just pancaked.
It sounded like a clap of thunder. It looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out. About a second later, the bottom floor caves out. The building followed after that.
For a large building 100 metres side to side to fall with a level roofline at freefall, straight down through its own structure, the entire building's structural integrity must have been removed simultaneously and instantaneously. Even a small amount of resistance would have been measurable as reduced downward acceleration. Any lack of symmetry in the resistance would have caused the building to tumble instead of coming straight down through its own structure. Any breaking, bending, crushing or pulverising of the building's components would create resistance and in turn prevent all the gravitational potential energy of the building from being converted completely into kinetic energy and therefore in turn inhibit the freefall.
This is high school physics.
A building cannot do free fall with 40,000 tons of structural steel in its structural system.
This is rather incredible. You cannot have a building falling at free fall, which means not one of those columns gave any resistance.
The building we are discussing is of course the Salomon Brothers building in downtown Manhattan, also known as World Trade Center 7 or just Building 7. Constructed in 1987, it was a modern steel-framed high-rise. It was a 47-storey, Class A, fully fire-protected structure with reinforced concrete floors, built around 82 solid steel structural columns rooted into the Manhattan bedrock, 58 perimeter and 24 core columns. It stood an impressive 610 feet tall. As a highly fire-protected structure, it had 3-hour fire resistance ratings for all the columns and 2-hour fire resistance ratings for the floor assemblies. Here, for contrast, you can see a construction worker walking next to one of the huge columns. The design was so robust that prospective tenants were offered the option of removing entire floors to create high bays, which was done higher up in the building.
But we really couldn't see a lot of damage from this angle from the north side of the structures. That's why everybody was so surprised when all of a sudden it just fell.
This building's destruction was investigated by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. The simple observation of freefall should have been the starting point for their investigation. They recognised the huge implications of what freefall indicated.
A free fall time would be an object that has no structural components below it.
But they refused to acknowledge it in their investigation until they were backed into a corner by a high school physics teacher named David Chandler.
A student took a video of me dropping a soccer ball from a ladder. I imported the video into Tracker, then marked the position of the ball in each frame. Tracker captures the position and time data from which it can compute velocity and acceleration and graph anything versus anything else, basically. This is a graph of velocity versus time for that soccer ball as it's dropped. And notice that the slope, that this basically is a linear graph when you take velocity versus time when there's a constant acceleration. So as note here, the slope is nearly constant at about 9.8 meters per second squared. Notice how in the end it deviates from a straight line, because as the speed builds up, the drag increases, and so you're actually getting a little bit of a noticeable effect due to air resistance, even just from a ball dropping a few meters like that. Okay? So air resistance, as subtle a force as it is detectable. This is a graph for the roofline of WTC-7. Note that for well over 2 seconds, the graph is linear, so the acceleration, similar to the soccer ball, the acceleration is constant. the slope of the linear portion of the graph is essentially equal to the acceleration of gravity within the margin of error of the measurements. In other words, for this building, even though it is falling straight down through its own supporting structure, free fall actually happened. Notice also that there's a sharp onset of free fall. The building is holding steady, then it simply lets go. In the approximately 2.5 seconds of free fall, it falls over 100 feet, the equivalent of about 8 stories. Free fall is motion under the influence of gravity alone. All resistance must be removed. Some people argue that the resistance in the case of WTC-7 was not significant because the falling mass was so great. It's true the falling mass was great, but the strength of the supporting structure was even greater. The structure was built to support 3 to 5 times the actual load. When it does eventually engage the structure, the rate of acceleration slows, then actually decelerates. Amazingly, someone at NIST added a nice straight red regression line through their stage 2 data. They even gave the equation of the line. It shows that the slope is exactly equal to the acceleration of gravity. So that red line is a flat-out absolute admission of they're even closer to the acceleration of gravity than my measurement. They were right smack on the money. They're on that number for this accepted as acceleration of gravity in feet units, okay, 32. The red line on this graph means that NIST acknowledges WT7 came down without resistance and without doing any work for over 100 feet. It means all support for 8 stories was suddenly removed by something other than the falling mass.
The implications of Building 7 coming down in free fall are huge for every fire service in the world. The reason for that is because when you fight a high-rise building fire, what you do is you go to the floor below the fire, you establish a bridgehead, you then send breathing apparatus teams up the stairs onto the next floor where the fire actually is, together with water jets, to go and find the fire, locate it, attack it, and put it out. You do not at any time think that the building you're actually stood in is suddenly going to collapse down into a pile of rubble in 6 seconds the way that Building 7 did. So it changes completely how you're going to fight high-rise fires. Every procedure for fighting high-rise buildings is going to have to change. So for firefighters, everything's going to change. For building engineers and architects, it's also going to have to change, because the unspoken acceptance before that the building frame would always stay up because the fire can't get hot enough to take out a steel frame, well, clearly, according to NIST now, this can happen.
Our study has identified thermal expansion as a new phenomenon that can cause the collapse of a structure. For the first time, we have shown that fire can induce a progressive collapse.
When considered objectively from a professional firefighter's point of view, the office fires in Building 7 could have been easily controlled and extinguished relatively safely, especially if they'd been attacked early in the day as intended by the fire crews in the building before they were ordered to evacuate. The main fires in 7 had developed only on a handful of lower floors, the most visible being on floors 7 and 8 plus floors 12 and 13. There were other small fires on higher floors, but they'd burned themselves out. The fire on the 12th floor, in the northeast corner, is said to have caused a girder in the 13th flooring assembly to move off its seat, resulting in the building's complete failure and collapse. However, there are many problems with this theory. Debris from the collapse of the North Tower at 10:28 a.m. is officially suggested as the most likely source of ignition, but there are conflicting witness reports from inside the building before this time of smoke, heat and explosions.
After I called several individuals, one individual told me that to leave and leave right away. Mr. Hess came running back in He said, we're the only ones up here, we got to get out of here. He found the stairwell. So we subsequently went to the stairwell and we're going down the stairs. When we reached the 6th floor, the landing that we were standing on gave way. There was an explosion and the landing gave way. And I was left there hanging. I had to climb back up and now I had to walk back up to the 8th floor. After getting to the 8th floor, everything was dark. It was dark and it was very, very hot. Very hot. I asked Mr. Hess to test the phones as I took a fire extinguisher and broke out the windows. The firefighters came. They came to the window and because I was going to come out on the fire hose. I didn't want to stay there any longer. It was too hot. I was going to come out on the fire hose. They came to the window and they started yelling, "Do not do that. It won't hold you." And then they ran away. See, I didn't know what was going on. That's when the first tower fell. When they started running, the first tower was coming down. I had no way of knowing that. Then I saw them come back. Now I saw them come back with more concern on their faces. And then they ran away again. The second tower fell. All this time, I'm hearing all type of explosions. All this time, I'm hearing explosions.
Mr. Hess!
That's Mr. Hess's Corporation Counsel.
What floor? What?
8th floor.
8th floor, 7 World Trade. 7.
That's right. I'm standing here right now just off Broadway by City Hall with Michael Hess, who is the city's Corporation Counsel. Mr. Hess, you were trapped in, I believe, 7 World Trade Center. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I was. I was up in the Emergency Management Center on the 23rd floor, and when all the power went out in the building, another gentleman and I walked down to the 8th floor where there was an explosion, and we've been trapped on the 8th floor with smoke, thick smoke all around us for about an hour and a half.
It's important to note that in Jennings' full interview, he is adamant that the explosion he experienced was inside Building 7. He saw both towers still standing after returning up to the 8th floor. The explosion which trapped him and Hess was not caused by the collapse of the towers.
What happened was, when we made it back to the 8th floor, as I told you earlier,
Yes.
both buildings were still standing because I looked one way, looked the other way, now there's nothing there. When I got to the 6th floor, before all this happened, when I got to the 6th floor, there was an explosion. That's what forced us back to the 8th floor.
Okay.
Both buildings were still standing. Keep in mind, I told you the fire department came and ran. They came twice. Why? Because building Tower 1 fell, then Tower 2 fell.
For some unknown reason, on the morning of 9/11, Building 7's Firecom automatic main scheme alarm system had been deactivated for 8 hours at 6:47 a.m. As a Class A fire-protected structure, Building 7 employed Blaze Shield fire protection fibre to give its flooring assemblies a minimum of 2 hours fire protection, and its main supporting columns 3 hours fire protection. It also had complete fire separation between floors. This means that the proposed source of ignition managed to ignite fires on several fire-separated floors, in an environment consisting of large amounts of suffocating dry powdered gypsum and concrete dust. In their description of the fires, NIST states that WTC-7 endured fires for almost 7 hours. The fires burned for sufficient time to cause significant distortion and or failure to the building structure. To help reinforce their theory of fire-induced building failure, NIST repeatedly reaffirms that the fires were long-lasting and uncontrolled. The argument of long-lasting fires is commonly used to explain Building 7's collapse. This is in fact quite misleading. A member of the public might conclude from this that static locations within Building 7 were subjected to 7 hours of continuous stress from uncontrolled fires. However, a fire's survival depends upon fuel availability. A fire will move from fuel to fuel, from combustible to combustible, in accordance with ordinary fire physics, burning out and self-extinguishing as it travels. The fuel for the fires in 7 was limited to ordinary office contents, with combustible load levels in the range of only 22 to 32 kilograms per square metre. There were no remotely fed static fires, such as fires fueled by pipes connected to diesel tanks, and no use of accelerants. NIST actually admits that the fires were only able to survive for 20 to 30 minutes in any one location due to restricted fuel levels. The computer models proposed by NIST of the fire travel on the 12th floor don't actually correspond with the observed and photographed reality, although they do conveniently create a theoretical fire which manages to travel around column 79 and burn for longer than the available fuel levels would allow. One might speculate that the extended fire durations in this area are modelled by NIST out of necessity to meet their hypothetical degree of thermal expansion. The actual photographic and video evidence of the 12th floor fires reveals that it had travelled from the south side of the building to the north side via the interior offices by 3 p.m. and had engulfed the northeast corner by about 3:15 p.m. The observed fires on the 12th floor were as follows. At 2 p.m. the fire can be seen breaking out of the southeast face. It is travelling north towards this viewpoint. 28 minutes later and the fire had moved north whilst dying down in the southeast. Another 30 minutes and the fire has moved to the north face and starts travelling west from left to right as we look at it. By 3:50 p.m. it's 2/3 of the way across the north face and visibly burning out to the left in the northeast corner where the building is said to have failed at the column 79. Another 30 minutes later and the fire is mostly burned out on the 12th floor, which means that temperatures are starting to fall. NIST's computerised model of catastrophic thermal expansion required maximum temperatures in the northeast corner to the left for the next hour until the building fails. But as can be seen, the fire on the 12th has burned out in that area and temperatures will be dropping. In the context of a heavily engineered, modern Class A fire-protected steel frame structure, such as Building 7, with only normal fire loading, a complete structural failure of the entire building would not have been realistically expected. However, even though historically no modern steel-framed high-rise had ever failed in this way prior to this date, this building was evacuated and cordoned off for several hours in advance with an almost certain anticipation of its complete and catastrophic structural failure.
You hear that? Keep your eye on that building, it'll be coming down. The building is about to blow up. Move it back.
One of the reasons given for the decision not to attack the fires in Building 7 was a lack of water supplies. However, this claim does not stand up to proper scrutiny. New York City and Lower Manhattan's municipal water supply has radically improved since the Dutch settled there in the early 1600s. Historically, it was actually the threat of fires which provided the main drive for a more robust and reliable source of water supply. There were significant fires in the 1830s in Manhattan, which led to the city looking upstate for the first time for a much more resilient water supply. Water is now derived from a large area, covering 8 counties in New York State and a small slither of Connecticut. The water supply system consists of 19 reservoirs and 3 controlled lakes, has 580 billion gallons of water storage and serves 9.4 million people in New York City and upstate counties. New York City's water is gravity-fed by large aqueducts flowing from north to south, the Delaware and Catskill aqueduct systems. The water pressure for Lower Manhattan south of 14th Street is regulated before entering a network of multiple 20-inch north to south primary mains with 12-inch diameter secondary mains in each street to provide water supplies to individual buildings. There are 20-inch primary mains in West Street, Greenwich, West Broadway, Church Street and Broadway, bringing water south towards the World Trade Center. Additional water mains east of Broadway also contribute to the delivery capacity to Lower Manhattan. 20-inch east and west mains on principal east-west streets such as Chambers, Vesey and Liberty interconnect with the north-south mains to create a primary distribution grid. The combination of 20-inch primary and 12-inch secondary mains connected to a gravity-fed supply with enormous volume capacity represents a very robust water distribution system. It was claimed by NIST's lead investigator that Building 7's fires were left to burn because of poor water availability to firefighting operations. NIST stated, had a water supply for the automatic sprinkler system been available, it is likely that the fires in WTC-7 would have been controlled and the collapse prevented. From a firefighter's perspective, the claim of failed local water supplies as a reason for a fire being left to burn makes little sense. Even in the most difficult situations, fire services will get water to an instant one way or another. It's one of the profession's fundamental responsibilities. If local supplies are lacking, firefighters will seek other sources and tap into them as quickly as possible, either from an alternative water main, a different location within the same water main, or from alternative water sources like the River Hudson. It was proposed by NIST that the water supply to Building 7 may have been compromised by damage from the falling towers in the morning. However, as explained, the mains water supply on Manhattan runs from north to south, with Building 7 positioned north and upstream of the towers. This diagram was produced by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and depicts the degree of impact from debris due to the collapse of the towers. The impact of debris in the region of Building 7 was described as light and consisting mostly of aluminium cladding and other small debris. Here we can see debris from North Tower between Building 7 on the left and the Verizon building on the right. A 2002 privately commissioned fire science and engineering investigation specifically looked into the water supply available to firefighting operations on 9/11. It identified very healthy water pressures ranging from 44 to 60 psi at the 14th Street pressure regulators between 6:40 am and 11:50 am on the morning of 9/11. Their report stated, the collapse of the towers did not have any effect on pressures at the 14th Street regulators. Hydraulic calculations clearly show that the robust municipal water distribution system of Manhattan had the capacity to deliver even more water than was consumed. The NIST reports themselves are littered with information identifying healthy water supplies after the collapse of the towers. This picture was taken shortly after 10:30 am. Building 7 is in the background to the right, behind the fire appliance at the corner of Barclay and Washington Street. Notice the swollen hose delivering water to the pump. The firefighters are operating the appliance and manoeuvring a charged hose to put out a car fire in the distance. For operational effectiveness and obvious safety reasons, firefighters do not commit into buildings without a proper and dependable water supply. Volume 1 of NIST's Structural Fire Response Report reads, between 11 am and 12 noon, approximately 40 FDNY members arrived at WTC-7 with orders to put the fires out inside WTC-7. Inside, they surveyed conditions and reported seeing small fires. A chief officer who had been inside the building about 20 to 25 minutes went to the FDNY command post and reported to the command post chief that he believed the fires inside WTC-7 could be extinguished. Thus the chief went back to extinguish the fires. He would not have done this without a good water supply. Here we can see World Trade Center Building 5, which was south of 7, but still had a good water supply for firefighting, as did other locations south of 7. New York Harbor fireboats, capable of delivering tens of thousands of gallons of water every minute into the main system and to pumps on the fireground, had staged on the Hudson River and laid large diameter delivery hoses to the corner of Vesey and West Street and West and Liberty. In a formal legal interview under oath, FDNY Chief Peter Hayden of Division 1 was asked about water availability at Building 7. He confirmed that water was available and standpipes were in operation. This footage also shows the sprinkler system in Building 7 delivering water to a lower floor. The first 20 lower floors were supplied with water from the street main system. According to all the evidence, water supplies clearly were not an issue for firefighting at Building 7.
We've got some news just coming in, actually, that the Salomon Brothers building in New York, right in the heart of Manhattan, has also collapsed. There were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because this whole downtown area behind me has been completely sealed off and evacuated, apart from the emergency workers. That was done by the mayor, Rudy Giuliani.
That building right there, the brown building, the tall one, is number 7 World Trade Center. I've heard several reports from several different officers now that that is the building that is going to go down next. In fact, one officer told me they're just waiting for that to come down at this point.
Building 7 was not evacuated and left to burn because the fires were too severe, nor was it evacuated because of poor water supplies, or because the building was in obvious danger of imminent structural failure and collapse from normal office fires. There has to have been other reasons that we do not know about for its evacuation. Building 7's collapse, according to NIST, was the result of a series of accidental and unpredictable factors. Factors which did not come together in such a way as to determine the fate of the building until minutes, or possibly even seconds, before the building's sudden onset of failure. Based upon these facts and the lack of empirical precedents, this complete collapse could not have been realistically predicted. Yet we know from premature media reports and the textual evidence of the oral histories of the firefighters at the scene that at least 60 firefighters had been told Building 7 was coming down. Some were told this hours in advance. The foreknowledge being cascaded down to and spreading among the operational firefighters came from within the Office of Emergency Management, from New York City officials who somehow knew in advance that both the Twin Towers and Building 7 were going to be coming down. This information was also given to Mayor Giuliani, causing him to evacuate Building 7.
I saw people jumping out of the World Trade Center. I saw some of the firefighters who I know going into the building. And we were in a building in which we were trapped for about 10-15 minutes.
Are you talking about did you go immediately to the Office of Emergency Management?
No, I went down to the scene and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, the head of emergency management. And we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building. So we were trapped in the building for 10-15 minutes and finally found an exit and got out, walked north, and took a lot of people with us.
This foreknowledge is verified in the oral histories of emergency responder Richard Zerillo, an EMT, emergency medical technician, working in fire operations, who, when interviewed by the World Trade Center Task Force on the 25th of October 2001, stated that he'd been informed by the Office of Emergency Management that the buildings, plural, were going to be coming down, and the first tower did come down very shortly after he reported this to his nearest fire chiefs and a fire commissioner. Not only are we being told that on this day the first steel-framed Class A fully fire-protected high-rise totally failed primarily due to fire, but that 3 of these steel-framed superstructures failed on the same day, all primarily due to fire. Coincidentally, all 3 owned or leased by the same person, Larry Silverstein, who'd had the incredible foresight to purchase double indemnity insurance for the buildings against terror attacks not long beforehand. In a TV interview, Silverstein said that he had a consistent routine of having breakfast and coffee every morning at 8 a.m. in the World Trade Center restaurant near his office called Windows on the World. But on the morning of September the 11th, he happened to have a dermatologist appointment and broke his routine. He later became involved in the operations of the day when he claims he was called by the fire department commander to say that Building 7's fires could not be contained, to which Silverstein curiously replied, "We've had such a terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it."
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such a terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse. The
term pull it is not a term used by the firefighting profession. By 5:20 p.m. the building had been evacuated for hours, but when it was evacuated, the term evacuate would have been used, not pull it. It may just be a coincidence, but Silverstein is actually using a term commonly used by the building demolition profession.
Good afternoon, Milwaukee Company.
Sorry, is this Controlled Demolitions?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I was wondering if there was someone I could talk to briefly, just to ask a question I had.
Well, what kind of question?
Well, I just wanted to know what a term meant in demolition terms.
Okay, what type of term?
Well, if you were in the demolition business and you said the term pull it, I was wondering what exactly that would mean.
Pull it?
Yeah.
Hold on a minute.
Thank you.
Sir?
Yes?
Pull it is when they actually pull it down.
Oh. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Silverstein also appeared to know that Building 7 would need replacing at least 17 months in advance of its collapse in 2001. In a recorded presentation given in Israel, he slipped up by revealing that the first design meeting for the reconstruction of Building 7 was actually in April of 2000.
And so, next thing you know, we've got the designs of the building. And the first design meeting was in April of 2000. And construction began shortly thereafter in 2002.
The expert that you're about to hear from is Danny Joenko. He was considered to be one of the best high-rise demolition experts in the world. Please note his natural reaction. He was not aware of Building 7 and his reaction to the footage is unprejudiced.
Zie je vanaf boven gaan? Nee, je gaat vanaf onder.
Die gaat vanaf onder, ja.
Toch?
Ja.
Ze hebben gewoon kolommen weggeblazen. Er is nagesprongen.
Dit valt anders dan het World Trade Center.
Vind je niet dan?
Ja, je ziet het, de onderste verdiepingen gaan eerst.
Ja, en de rest zakt er gewoon in. Dus dit is controlled demolition.
Zeker weten?
Zeker weten. Er is nagesprongen. Dit is in opdracht gebeurd. Dit heeft een team gedaan van experts.
Maar dit is ook op 11 september gebeurd.
Dezelfde dag?
Dezelfde dag.
Dezelfde dag? Weet je dat zeker?
Ja.
Was het zeker weten de 11e? Dat kan geen waar zijn.
7 uur nadat de World Trade Center naar beneden viel.
Ja?
Can you confirm it was number 7 that just went in?
Yes, sir.
And you guys knew this was coming all day.
We had heard reports that the building was unstable and that it eventually would either come down on its own or it would be taken down.
As scientists, the staff at NIST will be more than well aware of the scientific investigation principle of Occam's razor, a principle of economy. It encourages the inquirer to avoid overcomplicating an investigation, to look for the most logical answer to a problem based upon accepted and tested laws of nature and science. In other words, a simple hypothesis is generally better than a complex one. Hypotheses should not be multiplied without necessity, and in other words, the simplest explanation is always to be preferred, unless further evidence forces its abandonment. An honest investigation should always start by looking at the observed event or data, then follow the evidence wherever it leads. So why did NIST, ignoring the scientifically accepted principle of Occam's razor and the obvious observation of the building's freefall, begin their investigation with such a complex and unprecedented hypothesis involving fire? Their proposal read, the challenge was to determine if a fire-induced floor system failure could occur in WTC7 under an ordinary building contents fire.
The column at the very right is column 79, and that's the column that first buckles, causing the floors to come down, followed by a quick succession of failures of adjoining columns.
These pictures were taken in 1985 during the early stages of Building 7's construction. As can be seen, the steel framework was designed not to fail. In addition to its extremely robust and substantial composition, this heavy steel framework, as well as being laterally supported by poured reinforced concrete floors with thousands of shear studs holding beams and flooring assemblies solidly in place, was also spray foam and gypsum board fire protected. Not only was this building's engineering extremely robust, but the amount and thickness of steel involved also had enormous capacity for thermal conduction and dissipation of heat, meaning that it would require very substantial heating in any single location for a large local increase in thermal stress. Normal travelling fires fueled by no more than normal office furniture, as described in the observed fire section of this film, will not have much, if any, effect upon fire-protected steel framing of this standard.
Here is our structural model showing the building collapsing, which matches quite well with the video of the event.
Notice to the left how the entire bolted and welded steel framework of the interior just cascades as if it's unconnected, like Jenga.
It is possible that you could have a local failure as a result of a connection failing. But the likelihood of that failure dragging the entire building in such a fashion that all the columns would fail at the same time is an impossibility.
Impossibility?
Yes.
The complex and expensive NIST computerized theory and animated model of collapse clearly conflicts with the observed reality. It ended very prematurely in the collapse sequence. It does not explain or reflect the building's freefall, and, as Richard Feynman explains, it does not matter what your name is, how many titles you possess, or how much money you spend. If your theory disagrees with the observed event, it's wrong.
Okay, now that's the present situation. Now I'm going to discuss how we would look for a new law. In general, we look for a new law by the following process. First, we guess it. Then we well, don't laugh, that's really true. Then we compute the consequences of the guess to see what, if this is right, if this law that we guessed is right, we see what it would imply, and then we compare those computation results to nature, or we say compare to experiment or experience, compare it directly with observation to see if it works. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. In that simple statement is the key to science. It doesn't make a difference how beautiful your guess is, it doesn't make a difference how smart you are who made the guess, or what his name is. If it disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it.
Even to this day, NIST refuses to release its data for scientific peer review. Their guardedness may be related to the fact that an organisation backed by thousands of architects and engineers has clearly identified that rather than following the evidence and data in the manner of true science, in addition to ignoring the importance of freefall, NIST has distorted and omitted many technical factors which completely undermine their theory. Distortions which include temperature simulations and fire durations, the degree of thermal expansion of the beams blamed for the collapse initiation, correct dimensions of a critical girder seat width, omissions such as the presence of girder web stiffeners and lateral support beams, girder side plates which would preclude the key lateral displacement at the alleged failing column 79, and the existence of thousands of shear studs fixing beams to floor assemblies. NIST cited the existence of shear studs in other buildings involved in more aggressive fires as the reason for their resilience. In 2008, their report stated that had the shear studs been included in the construction, the structural failure would not have occurred.
NIST went on to say in that report in 2008 was that the reason that column was able to be pushed off of its seating was because they said the column was unrestrained. And yet it was discovered last year in 2012, after a Freedom of Information Act request was granted, that that NIST claim was not true. The columns were restrained. In fact, there were 3,896 shear studs holding those columns in place.
My name is Leroy Halsey. I'm a forensic engineer and a professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Steel is a very fire-resistant material.
When a structure fails, my job is to figure out why. Over the next year, with a team of PhD students, I will be rebuilding World Trade Center Building 7.
How does floor 13 respond with respect to 12?
Using the same drawings that were used to build it originally, we will reconstruct it virtually. Our goal is to figure out why it collapsed late in the afternoon on September 11, 2001, even though it was not hit by an airplane. The investigation conducted by the National Institute of Standards and Technology concluded
what we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event. The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fires.
Our investigation will evaluate the probability that this was the cause of the collapse. We are making this study open and transparent. Whether you are a physicist, engineer, architect, fire expert, or a specialist in another field, or just an ordinary citizen, we want your participation. We are making all of our data available online. Every aspect of our process regarding the modeling will be shared. And we will be giving regular updates from the lab as we continue our work. Join us in getting to the bottom of why World Trade Center 7 collapsed on September 11th, 2001.
Well, now today we're going to release to you the results of a $300,000 study conducted by scientists at the University of Alaska. Those PhDs have used computer technology to prove that the way the National Institute of Standards and Technology says that Building 7 came down was not only wrong, it's impossible. Furthermore, they can now say with absolute certainty that there is only one way that building could have come down, and that is for the entire core of support beams to fail at the same time. It was 6 years ago that I traveled to New York City just before 9/11 to report on claims that were being made by the group Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. That claim was on 9/11, the third building that came down that day could only have been taken out through a total failure of support columns. That's what they were saying. Now, we would know this as something called a controlled demolition. Take a look.
And in a controlled demolition, when you have a core and an exterior, and you take the core out, it pulls in the exterior and it comes down.
What happens if you leave half of them? So if it's not a controlled demolition, if you just have a failure of half the columns,
you'd have a partial collapse.
Again, that was 6 years ago, and yet now on the 18th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, a new study has just been published, one that took hundreds of thousands of dollars and several years to complete. The groundbreaking Building 7 study, a structural reevaluation of the collapse of World Trade Center 7, was conducted by Dr. Leroy Hulsey, a PhD, as well as two other researchers at the University of Alaska. It is a finite element analysis that uses computer modeling based on the original blueprints for World Trade Center 7 to determine what could and what could not have caused the collapse. The study examines NIST conclusions and finds them to be untenable.
Did Building 7 collapse from fires? And the answer is no. UAF finding shows that the girder bearing at column 79 moved less than 2 inches. It would not have been a problem. It did not have a problem in lateral buckling, not using their fires.
The executive summary of the UAF study finds that, quote, fires could not have caused weakening or displacement of structural members capable of initiating any of the hypothetical local failures alleged to have triggered the total collapse of the building. Nor could any local failures, even if they had occurred, have triggered a sequence of failures that would have resulted in the observed total collapse. Well, this leads Dr. Hulsey and his colleagues to this, quote, it is our conclusion based upon these findings that the collapse of World Trade Center 7 was a global failure involving the near simultaneous failure of all columns in the building and not a progressive collapse involving the sequential failure of columns throughout the building. Well, that failure of columns would mean that nearly all of the columns in the base of the building would have to have been taken out simultaneously. Remember, this is a building that on 9/11 was never hit by a plane. It simply collapsed. What's more, Dr. Hulsey's conclusion does match a theory that has long been promoted by so-called 9/11 truthers, that explosives were actually used to bring down Building 7.
Here's the UAF collapse simulation. Velocity is a red. And
actual building collapse velocity by David Chandler, took the video and monitored aspects of it in time and plotted it. He was a physicist, and over a 2.5 second period, and you could see it's free fall. That's what that building did. And our red simulation points are very much on top of that, just to kind of give you an idea.
Alaska University's forensic examination has provided additional recognition of the validity of the original measurement of Building 7's freefall by David Chandler. We now have recognition of the freefall of Building 7 from the original and independent measurement of David Chandler, a reluctant and veiled recognition by NIST, and from the Engineering Department of Alaska Fairbanks University. Of the hundreds of thousands of words devoted to their voluminous reports on 9/11, NIST only published a couple of lines of text regarding 7's freefall, recorded as discreetly as possible. NIST's recognition of the freefall of 7 can be found in the third paragraph from the bottom of page 45 of their final report. Here NIST acknowledges that the north face descended at gravitational acceleration, and in order for this to occur, the buckled columns must have provided negligible support, clearly stating that this freefall drop continued for approximately 8 stories, or 32 meters, 105 feet, requiring zero resistance from all 81 columns at the same time throughout 8 stories. The freefall is also illustrated by the red line through the graph in figure 3-15. The red line through the data has a slope of 32.196 feet per second squared, which is 9.81 meters per second squared in metric units, which is of course gravitational acceleration. And NIST continues to be deceptive by claiming these findings are consistent with their simulation, which is clearly untrue. The Alaska University report confirms in detail that the NIST computer model needed to make many unjustified and some might say fraudulent alterations of the actual structure in order to get their model to collapse. And, as Ben Swan just explained, the only way Alaska University could get a collapse that resembles the actual collapse was to remove all vertical support over 8 floors, something which fire obviously cannot do. To muddy the waters and confuse the lay reader, NIST added their Stage 1 reading, which, after examination and research, is found to be a non-downward movement, a lateral movement of a kink forming in the middle of the north face roofline, only visible and measurable via NIST's deliberate selection of a low camera angle, which introduced a significant parallax measurement error, fraudulently buying their analysis extra time. A more detailed description of this can be viewed by searching for David Chandler 9/11 Anniversary Physics Talk, which will be shared on the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth website.
I've joined the fire service in November 2000 and I'm currently employed by the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service in Edinburgh. I've been aware of the problems with the official story for 9/11 since approximately 2010. For a period of time I was in a state of shock that we had not been told the truth about that event. I was surprised that I hadn't seen Building 7 before. It's not something that's been publicised. There are not many people that know about it. If you want to know about Building 7, you more or less have to go on the internet and research it for yourself.
My name is Michelle Weiss Little, sister of fallen hero, FDNY, firefighter David Martin Weiss.
Hey, I'm born for firefighting. Ever since I was a kid, you know, I knew what I wanted to do.
David was a firefighter, and firefighters risk their lives every day for their brothers and sisters, for you and for any of your family members. My brother would have gone into that building no matter who was in there, no matter who is responsible. He faced his fear and he did his duty. As a country, we promised we would never forget. They gave their life. At the very least, we can give our time to demand a real investigation.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we really appreciate the courage you have to show up and the openness you have to listen to what we have to say tonight. And I'm just going to start by telling a little bit about my story and how I came to change my views on this completely. Right after 9/11, I tried everything I could to get out to Ground Zero. I was on a team that we thought they were going to call up, but they didn't, and they ended up calling up a USAR team instead. Anyways, I went out there for the funerals. I helped support however I could. This was there about a month and a half after Ground Zero. And so I was very emotionally attached to it. When anyone would talk about it, I couldn't listen. I just didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to consider it. And my lieutenant for years had told me that it looked like, you know, something didn't add up. And I just told him he was crazy. He should leave the country. I'm very patriotic, and I just thought, if you believe that anyone could be responsible for this, you shouldn't be here. It was a friend of mine from the military that actually opened my eyes to something else. And one thing led to another, and I kept looking. 9/11 kept coming up. And because it wasn't being shoved down my throat, I decided to look into it a little bit more. And when I did, I knew there was a lot of conspiracy theories out there and a lot of crazy conspiracy theories, and I decided to do my own research. And so I went to the Zacarias Moussaoui exhibit trials. This is the U.S. government's evidence on 9/11, basically. And I wanted to see what they had. I was kind of shocked. I wanted to know, how did they identify the terrorists so quickly? You know, how were they so sure? And so as I started looking, this is what I found, and this is the main evidence that they had. This was found after the plane crash. This was found the next day. So you can see they found bandanas, papers, more passports. You can see these passports. They're pretty well intact. I've been to a lot of fires, and if out in a room that's not on fire, we'll find this kind of stuff. But the thing that stuck out to me, and someone else had pointed out, was, well, wait a second. Those passports, those IDs, they were inside either pockets or luggage or inside that plane. Then that plane hit those towers or went into the field or went into the Pentagon, and then they blew up. There were big fireballs we all saw, and then they were found actually on top of the pile. So that stuff started not adding up for me. I was like, well, wait a second. How'd they find it the next day? It should have been either on the ground or burned up or buried in the rubble. That led to Colonel Nelson. Once I started looking into this, I read his article, and he's a 34-year Air Force crash investigator, and he'd written a pretty amazing article, and he talks about his own experience into 9/11. And once I spoke with him, I asked him, I said, when did you first notice something was wrong? He said, for me, it was the first day. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what stuck out to you? He said, well, I've been to a lot of crash sites. I know how they work. And he said, it was the Pentagon. And he said, when I looked at the Pentagon, and here's some pictures of it, he said, what I saw the first day was people picking up debris, and they were removing it as quickly as possible. He said, every crash I've ever been to, it's the MP's job to secure that area, flag it, tag it, take pictures. Nobody touches anything until after the investigators are there. Well, they were cleaning it up before any investigation. He said by day 3, he knew something was wrong. And by day 3 is when he said they identified the terrorists, and it was the IDs. He said, there's no way. He said, find those 19 terrorists. It would have taken weeks to months to find that kind of evidence, to sort through it, to go through it. And he said, to recreate the aircraft crash, he said, was impossible. 9/11 was the greatest loss of life and property damage in U.S. fire history. This should have been the most protected, preserved, over-tested, and thorough investigation of a crime scene in world history. Sadly, it was not. What was it? Well, we know from their own admission, the majority of the evidence was destroyed. Like Richard said, 22 years of experience. I've seen a lot of crime scenes. I've never seen anything like this in my life.
I was out at the site. I saw trucks leaving faster than anywhere I've ever seen, but I accepted it at the time, and for years I accepted it because it was a recovery and rescue operation, and that's normal to have something like that going. Again, we never seen anything like it, but that was expected. What I didn't know for years, what was going on behind the scenes, was that evidence was being destroyed when it was shipped off.
On the day of 9/11, while the remains of the Twin Towers and World Trade Center 7 were still smoldering, one of Mayor Giuliani's first concerns was clearing away the evidence from the crime scene.
We were able to move 120 dump trucks out of the city last night, which will give you a sense of the work that was done overnight.
It's wild out here. They just keep coming. Look. It doesn't stop. There's more. I keep thinking it's at the end, and it's not.
Despite reassurances that the rapid removal of the evidence from Ground Zero was important for emergency access, this process went far beyond merely clearing a path for rescue workers. As Eric Lawyer, founder of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, points out, the massive operation to haul away over 1.5 million tons of debris and to sell much of the steel to Chinese firm Baosteel at discount prices was not just an overzealous approach to clearing the area, but was itself a crime.
By their own admission, Tower 7 investigation, this investigation of Tower 7 had no physical evidence. How do you investigate a crime when you've destroyed all the evidence? It doesn't make sense. They also admit that they refused to test the explosives, or to test for explosives or residue of thermite.
Did you do any explosive residue testing on any item out of the building just to lay these ideas to rest?
Answer to that is no. We did not do it.
Now, this is what I'm going to go into here just real quickly, is there are national standards for an investigation. That's what all of us are asking for, an investigation that follows national standards and holds people accountable. This manual right here, just so you can see it, is what we'd call the kind of the Fire Investigation 101. This is the most basic fire investigation manual there. This is for the 2001 edition. This is what should have been referred to, at least. It doesn't have to be followed exactly, but it should have been used as a guideline for the investigation. I'm just going to cover a few of the things that are in here. So NIST violated, and the initial investigators that did not protect the scene violated the most basic of the guidelines. And I'm going to cover 5 of them here. One is the NFPA 9.3.6. It covers spoliation of evidence. Specifically what it reads is, once evidence has been removed from the scene, it should be maintained and not destroyed or altered until the investigation is complete. The steel was melted down prior to the investigation. We know that from their own admission. This is no conspiracy theory stuff. 19.2.4, exotic accelerants. If on the scene you find melted steel or concrete, you should consider the use of exotic accelerants. And they specifically say in the manual, thermite mixtures produce exceedingly hot fires that can account for melted steel and concrete. That also says they leave residues that can be tested for visually and chemically identifiable.
FEMA describes samples of steel that had been thinned to razor sharpness. In some cases, there were inexplicable holes in the steel. The fire engineering professors who found the samples could not come up with an explanation for it. They also could not explain the sulfidation of the steel. That is, steel had been chemically changed at the microstructural level in ways that indicated a chemical eutectic mixture had been achieved between sulfur, iron, and oxygen, causing steel to melt.
Again, they did not test for it. And just put it in perspective, on a routine house fire, if we suspect even the slightest use of an accelerant, we're going to test for it when there's no fatalities, when there's very little property damage. So to not do it on this, there is absolutely no excuse. I can't drive that point home enough. 18.15 is analyze fuel source. All available fuel sources should be considered and eliminated until one fuel can be identified as meeting all the physical damage criteria. For example, if you find pulverized concrete, which we all know there was in all 3 buildings, there was pulverized concrete, the only fuels that can create seeded explosions should be considered. So they shouldn't be considering fires. They shouldn't be doing that. It doesn't account for pulverized concrete. They should only be considering exotic accelerants and explosives. 19.4.8.2.6, extremism. The terrorist may include fire as but one of a variety of weapons along with explosives used in furthering his or her goal. We know they used them in '93. Why would we not test for them now? There was reports that day, multiple reports, which I'll get into here in a second. So they could have put them in the basement. How do we know that unless we test for it? I mean, even if it is the terrorists that they claim they are, we need to test this.
we did not find any evidence that explosives were used in the collapse of Building 7. We ran down detailed computer simulations of blast scenarios. This size blast would have produced an incredibly loud sound that was not recorded on videos of the collapse nor reported by witnesses.
You want to call your mother or something?
You gotta get back. You know that. You gotta get back.
All right.
Keep your eye on that building as they coming down.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Yeah,
if they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
What happened? It was an explosion. We was in the lobby, and then fucking the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
It's like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the planet, probably.
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion. But we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking thing blew, and we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary.
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second one was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one.
Third explosion after that.
Yes, sir. Everybody was inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. And they just let loose. Everything just let loose inside the building.
So what you told me is that there was a plane or whatever hit the building, then the secondary explosion.
It was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building.
14.3, preservation of the fire scene and physical evidence. We find the following. The cause of a fire explosion is not known until near the end of the investigation. The entire fire scene should be considered physical evidence and should be protected and preserved. It's just over and over. There's so many. You can go to our website, the Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. We have many more of these actual chapters that cover what they should have done that they did not do. So now, by their own admission, in all 3 building collapses, NIST refused to physically test, like Dr. Stephen Jones did, for explosives. This is just unbelievable. And here are their excuses, and I quote, "It is unlikely that 100 pounds of thermite or more could have been carried into World Trade Center 7 and placed around columns without being detected, either prior to September 11th or during that day." So again, I've been on a lot of fire scenes, and I've seen a lot of investigations, and why would we not test because something's hard to do? That's the exact reason you need to investigate it. If that was hard to do, we need to find out how they did it. And number 2, NIST excuse. In addition, no blast sounds were heard on the audio tracks of the video recordings during the collapse of World Trade Center 7 or reported by witnesses. That's one of the excuses why they didn't test. Well, apparently they didn't read Chapter 18. 18 is the general definition of explosions. Although an explosion is almost always accompanied by the production of a loud noise, the noise itself is not, in big bold letters, an essential element in the definition of an explosion. The generation and violent escape of gases are the primary criteria of an explosion. So that alone says they should have tested for it. But then we also, NIST has lied, and we can prove it as soon as the new investigation happens. The evidence is out there for you to see right now. We have 118 first responders who reported explosions. We have the radio transmissions from FDNY members that are still recorded today that reported explosions. We have audio recordings. We have video recordings. I've personally talked to witnesses that heard them. So there's nothing short of saying they lied, and they need to be held accountable. And besides that, like I said, there is no excuse for not testing for explosives. And so at the very least, at the very best, even if you want to believe the official story, this was the most incompetent investigation of all time. And I've talked to a lot of investigators that were there, and I asked them the specific question, why did they refuse to test? They weren't the ones who refused, but NIST did. And they said, all we can say, all they can answer is incompetence, or they tell me to shut up. They cannot give me any reason that follows national standards. So, but the reality, after all the research everybody here and the incredible people we're in the room with today have done, the reality is it was a criminal investigation to cover up the crime. So, I'd like, just to finish, I'd like to read a quote. This is from a retired, decorated FDNY lieutenant. Anyone who knows the fire service, he is a stud. He worked on Ladder Company 26, Rescue Company 3, Rescue Company 1 in his career. Anyone who knows, those are amazing companies. Here's his comment. Trade Tower 7 by itself is the smoking gun, not hit by an aircraft with only a few relatively small fires. It came down in a classic crimp and implosion, something only very precise demolitions can accomplish, which takes days, if not weeks, to prepare. The 9/11 Commission didn't even mention it, and FEMA actually stated they didn't know why it collapsed and left it at that. Brothers, I know that the above implications are hard, almost unthinkable, but the official explanation is utter nonsense, and 343 of our murdered brothers are crying out for justice. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Needless to say, an investigation of the 9/11 crime scene following the National Investigation Standards has never been conducted and never will be, as Giuliani oversaw the illegal destruction of the evidence itself. In the late 1990s, the mayor oversaw the creation of a state-of-the-art $13 million emergency command center to coordinate the city's disaster recovery and response efforts. Located on the 23rd floor of World Trade Center Building 7, just across Vesey Street from the Twin Towers, the center, dubbed by local press at the time as Giuliani's bunker, included reinforced, bulletproof, and bomb-resistant walls, its own air supply and water tank, beds, showers to accommodate 30 people, and 3 backup generators. It could be used to monitor all of New York's emergency communications frequencies and was staffed 24 hours a day. And yet, remarkably, on the morning of 9/11, neither Mayor Giuliani nor any other city personnel or police or fire department officials were in the bunker after the Twin Tower strikes. So why wasn't the mayor and the city's emergency personnel in the location that had been purpose-built for just such an event? According to Giuliani, they had been told to evacuate because they had been given a warning that the Twin Towers were going to collapse. A warning that was evidently not passed on to any of the emergency personnel that were still working in the buildings. Giuliani, in his own words, has admitted that he was warned that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. This despite the fact that there was no possible way for this to be predicted in the first hour of the unfolding disaster. Even more incredibly, despite being given this warning, no effort was made to pass it on to the police, firefighters, and other responders who were still working in and around the buildings. It is no wonder, then, that the fire department of New York so passionately detests Giuliani for his actions in disgracing their fallen brothers and covering up the 9/11 crime.
Rudy Giuliani has used the horrible events of September 11, 2001, to create a carefully crafted persona. But the fact is, what Rudy portrays is not a full picture of the decisions made that led, in our view, to the unnecessary deaths of our FDNY members and the attempt to stop the dignified recovery of those lost.
Reporting here from Times Square, I am standing next to Rudy Dent. He's a 32-year veteran of the New York City Fire Department. He's worked as well with the New York City Police Department. And you retired right after 9/11. He was there on 9/11. He saw World Trade Center Tower 7 come down. Rudy, tell us about what happened that day.
Well, I was off that day, and I received a call at home, and I got to see both buildings come down on TV. I jumped on my motorcycle. I did about 120 miles an hour across the Tappan Zee. I reported to my firehouse, and then I got my gear. A bunch of us got together. We commandeered a mail truck, and we made our way down to the site. At that time, Building 7 was still up. I saw Building 7 come down. My fellow firefighters who were there, they did that involuntary jerk when a loud explosion goes off. You know, you can't help it, and they did. I'm a Vietnam veteran too, so I kind of didn't jump like they did, but there was an explosion. The building did come down in complete classical controlled demolition. It came down on its own footprint. There's no question.
And then talk to me a little bit, obviously, as a professional in the fire department for 30 plus years, they're saying that blaming it on office fires, just a few office fires.
Well, if it wasn't so serious a situation, that would be completely laughable. That is ridiculous. First of all, our guys were up there. They were calling for additional hand lines to mop up the isolated pockets of fire. And let me just explain one thing. Never in the history of the world, never in the history of high-rise skyscrapers has ever a skyscraper ever come down because of fire. And I'm talking massive fire. And you know the reason why? Because fire does not burn by itself hot enough to compromise and melt steel.
You see molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah.
Like lava.
What we had in the World Trade Center, and I saw myself, was molten lava-like pockets of molten steel. All right, I spent the night on the pile searching for bodies, and I saw that with my own eyes. So who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe a bunch of government bureaucrats or my fellow brothers, which I lost 343 guys that day? And I lost Tommy O'Hagan, Bruce Van Hines, and Kenny Kumpel. And I can never forget that. I think of that before I go to bed. I think about it the first thing in the morning when I wake up. And it's in honor of them and their family that I will continue to do everything I can to make the rest of the world wake up to the fact that this was a false flag operation.
Right.
They call you a conspiracy theorist, and instead of talking about the technical, they want to know the who, the whys, and the whats. In other words, they want to engage in conspiracy theory. World Trade Center 7, I have no idea how they could do something like that, but it's obvious through the evidence we have that it was brought down in controlled demolitions. So that is a job for policemen and investigators. That's their job, and they are failing at this point to accomplish that.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, I was working on the Brooklyn side of the East River, just north of the Williamsburg Bridge. Having been an eyewitness to the attacks that day, and from being called to duty to assist the Fire Department of New York in the following days and weeks afterwards, 9/11 has never been far from my thoughts, having been burned forever into my soul. The 9/11 Commission concluded that Osama bin Laden and a group of Islamic extremists were responsible and carried out the attacks, and that was to be the end of it. Truth be told, that is far from the end of it. The 9/11 Commission was flawed, and in the words of two of its own, the chairman and the vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission, respectively, Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton, who stated in their book, without precedent, that they were set up to fail and were starved of funds to do a proper investigation. That's their own words. They also confirmed that they were denied access to the truth and misled by senior officials in the Pentagon and the Federal Aviation Authority, and that this obstruction and deception led them to contemplate slapping officials with criminal charges. The final report did not examine key evidence and neglected serious anomalies in the various accounts of what happened. The commissioners themselves admit their report was incomplete and flawed, and that many questions about the terror attacks remain unanswered. Nevertheless, the 9/11 Commission was swiftly closed down on August 21st, 2004. What happened on 9/11 is fundamentally important, but equally important is the way the 9/11 cover-up signifies an absence of democratic, transparent, and accountable government. Establishing the truth is, in part, about restoring honesty and trust and confidence in the American political system. That is why, on July 24th of this year, the Franklin Square Munson Fire District voted unanimously to adopt a legal resolution of support for the special federal grand jury investigation before the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The almost 3,000 innocent people who were murdered right before our eyes that day cannot speak, so it is left up to us to speak for them and demand
that their voices be heard in a court of law with subpoena power and an impartial jury to consider all of the evidence by placing 9/11 under a microscope and investigating everything and anything down to the smallest of details. I demand to know, as should everyone, especially the media, why important testimony made that day from over 150 police, firefighters, and first responders regarding explosions wasn't included in the commission report, nor investigated further. Why didn't the FBI or NIST examine the wreckage for explosives? Why wasn't Ground Zero considered a crime scene and sealed off and processed accordingly? Why was crucial evidence of melted structural steel suppressed and not even considered, or worse yet, allowed to be carted off and destroyed? Why won't, after 18 years, mainstream media such as ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or Fox News, and if Fox News here, I take that back and I apologize, report on any of this, let alone ask the hard questions of how and why certain things occurred the way they did, especially in the collapse of the third World Trade Center building, building number 7, that most people don't even know about. And finally, why can't Americans hear about FDNY Battalion Chief Oreo Palmer, who succeeded in making it to the point of impact on the 78th floor of the South Tower with his men, and reported that he had 2 isolated pockets of fire and that we should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. So he made it up to the fire floor, and he saw what was going on. And contradicting the official storyline that it was a raging fire up there, here's a brave fireman who made it onto the fire floor and was doing his job. 1 minute after the final transmission, the South Tower collapsed.
Battalion 7 on floor 40 of Tower 2. We got 1 elevator working up to the 40th floor. Staff by a member of Line 15.
As Chief of Battalion 7, Palmer was amongst the first to arrive at the scene. As he entered the South Tower, he single-handedly fixed an elevator and took it to the 40th floor, halfway to where almost 700 people were struggling to stay alive.
And then he started to climb on foot. And because he was a very, very fit man, he was able to make tremendous progress. He had run marathons, he ran half marathons.
We're on the 43rd floor. Here's stairway B. Unfortunately, trying to get up there, Oreo. I'm up to 5'5".
He went 12 floors in 10 minutes, wearing all the bunker gear, which is 50 or 60 pounds.
We're going to have to host it. I'm on 69 now, so we need a higher bank, please. These stairway walls have been compromised on 73 and 74. The walls are breached, so be careful. Yeah. That's 10 floors. 6 more to go.
During his ascent, Palmer discovered that one stairwell, the south, was still intact all the way to the impact zone and beyond. For the hundreds trapped there, this stairwell could have been an escape route.
What stair are you in, Oreo? South Tower, South Tower. We got 3 isolated pockets of fire. We should be able to knock it down with 2 lines. Where you know that? 78th floor, numerous 1045 code lines. 478. South Tower, numerous civilians. We're going to get 2 engines up here. All right, 10-4, we're on our way.
When I heard the tapes, you were watching a screen with all the words on it, but with a digital countdown, so you knew exactly what was coming. You knew the exact minute that the towers were going to go down. And you can't help but feel like you want to jump out of your seat and say, hurry up and get out of there. You know, you have one more minute before it comes down. And that's the hard part. That was the hard part. I was not surprised when I heard that Oreo had made it to the 78th floor. He made it up to the point of impact, and it's amazing.
Why can't Americans hear about that it took a lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act by the New York Times to get the fire department tapes released so that the public could hear exactly what the firefighters said? This occurring in August of 2005, almost exactly a year after 9/11 Commission had disbanded. So it would seem, until now, that we have left unmolested those who set fire to the house and prosecuted those who sounded the alarm. But that is changing. People lie, but the facts don't. All the American people want now, after 18 years, is the truth based on the facts. The bottom line here is that the American public has not been told the complete truth about the events of that fateful autumn morning 18 years ago.
I put it to you that the failing we should be concerned with is not a theoretical failing in Building 7's design or construction, but a failing in our institutions, and not just in the United States, but in Western civilized democracy, as this is indeed an international concern. NIST is an agency of the US Department of Commerce. During the years it was writing its World Trade Center reports, it was an agency of the Bush-Cheney administration. In 2004, the American Union of Concerned Scientists put out a document charging this administration with, quote, distortion of scientific knowledge for partisan political ends, end quote. By the end of the Bush administration, this document had been signed by over 15,000 scientists, including 52 Nobel laureates and 63 recipients of the National Medal of Science. When elements within the system of government start to veer off course or fail, the responsibility to identify, check and challenge those possible failings should first fall onto the respected shoulders of society's other leading institutions,
such as the criminal investigation bodies, the judiciary or academia. These bodies, unfortunately, are currently failing in that responsibility. In a follow-on documentary to supplement this film, called Beyond Bravo 7, we shall examine why this might be the case.
Nietzsche said that you could tell much about a man's character by how much truth he could tolerate. Sometimes it can really destroy you, an encounter with the truth.
Now, I can't solve this riddle for you, okay? It's either fire or controlled demolition. And you have to think for yourself. As historians, we observe that politicians, very powerful politicians, tell us not to ask these questions.
Propaganda works best when you don't see it for what it is.
Democracy can survive the greed of the ambitious and even the lies of fools, but it cannot survive the ignorance or deceit of its trusted institutions.
And we're obviously in an extremely perilous situation. If 9/11 is what many of us fear it is, we're in a situation where we really have lost control of our government, and unless we regain that, then the future potentially is extremely bleak for all of us.
So it would seem, until now, that we have left unmolested those who set fire to the house and prosecuted those who sounded the alarm. But that is changing. People lie, but the facts don't. All the American people want now, after 18 years, is the truth based on the facts.